there's a lot of different ways to build an app.
It's true. We've discussed a lot of them at a high level throughout the life of the podcast so far. But today we're going to dig a little bit deeper into one of them, and that's progressive web apps. And we actually have a lot of experience with this one. PerfectForm was built as a PWA, which progressive web app. So been there, done that. Let's talk about it. By definition, a progressive web app, PWA, is a web application that uses modern web capabilities to deliver an app-like experience to users. That differs in a few ways from a traditional website that you would, just pull up on your phone. What are some of the characteristics that make it different?
Usually like responsiveness, connectivity independent. So you don't necessarily need cell service or Wi-Fi, and it can still function.
Yeah, offline support.
Yeah. More app-like interactions. So it's like you're on native apps, whether you're in a browser or not. More discoverable because, they're, via search engine, blah, blah, blah. And they're more engageable or re-engageable than like a standard website.
It's something that builds that addictive, retentive kind of experience that allows people to come back to it.
Yeah, and one of the coolest things, what I liked about the PWA was you can quote unquote install it on a smartphone, right? You can you can save a shortcut, and it looks like it's an app from the App Store.
It looks like an app. It feels like an app. It smells like an app. But you don't have to go through the App Store.
Yeah, they're pretty cool.
Yeah, they really are. I like the technology, especially in theory. Some of the implementation, not so much, but that's more Apple's fault.
And I guess if we dive into the evolution of web technologies, PWAs kind of came into it when they started doing mobile first design stuff. When smartphones became a thing, websites were no longer just designed for being seen on a computer monitor. They now had to be designed to be seen on a smaller screen.
Yeah, I mean, word on the street is, I'm trying to remember sources, but I had heard somewhere that the original idea for apps on the iPhone were essentially PWAs. But then they changed it in favor of the App Store.
They fucked it all up with app stores and control. And then, so Google first introduced the PWA concept around 2015. And so that's when we started seeing more responsive websites and things that you can interact easier with your phone.
Yeah, that's kind of when the mobile first approach became a thing, and PWAs were part of that movement. And there were a lot of early adopters that had huge success stories with it, like Twitter, Pinterest, Starbucks, Adobe had something there, Best Western, Flipkart. There were tons of them, tons of companies and major applications that were used in businesses and for casual personal use that built PWAs, and it worked really well.
I don't think anyone will complain about the 90s website templates not being cool anymore.
That's fair.
Or even early 2000s, to be honest.
Oh my gosh.
Oh man. All right, we need to make a note. We need to do the evolution of web design.
Yeah.
But we have to make it more interactive. We might have to figure out how to show that screen better. I can do it post-edit. I can just have it.
Dude, I wonder if I could use the Wayback Machine and pull up my MySpace from 2007.
I bet we could.
The way that it looked back then.
That would be
because now MySpace is totally different because it got acquired and it's become this music-centric thing.
Yeah. Dude, I had a MySpace account and I had Caribbean beach background, Jimmy Buffett music playing. Oh man, that's hilarious.
I'm gonna open a browser right now. Wayback MySpace. I'm just gonna leave that there for myself. Oh, it's a question on Reddit. I'm gonna leave that there so I remember to go look at it.
Don't forget because we're gonna do this. All right, so I know we've talked a lot about PWAs. Let's jump into pros of PWAs. Why would people want to use a PWA over other technologies?
Yeah, the first one is performance. PWAs typically perform a lot better than a normal website. and that's because, or a web app rather, because
there's no difference between web app and websites.
Yeah. About that.
Yeah, we're salty. You make fun of us one time, we're gonna talk shit about you forever.
Absolutely.
Because there is a difference between web apps and websites.
There absolutely is. Kiss my. So anyways, PWAs typically perform a lot faster and a lot better than a traditional web app. And that's because they use systems that we don't usually think about when building a web app. If I'm building a web app, my first thought is not caching and web workers because they're a pain and other major optimization techniques. I'm just worried about, hey, is my design responsive? Is it mobile friendly? Cool. We're good.
Mm-hmm.
Moving on. And PWAs will utilize those latest and greatest technologies to give them an edge and give them a more native feel. Another big one is offline access, and that's made possible because of service workers and a couple of other technologies, but essentially they just allow for functionality of the app when you're offline, where trying to load a web app, you're just going to get
right.
No connection.
You're assumed that you have internet when you're using web apps or websites, I guess. And my favorite thing, no App Store middleman, because we've talked about this a lot. So especially like when you are like fresh startup, right? You're throwing out tons of iterations and updates. You can directly update it without waiting for App Store approval, which is huge. That was like one of our big sellers when we went the PWA route.
And the fees that are involved.
That
was a big
Apple
one with
takes 30%. Well, so PerfectForm was a marketplace, so it's really hard, which is like why, like when you are using the Kindle app, you can't buy things through the Kindle app. You have to go to a web browser and all of that annoying stuff because they have all these crazy dumb rules about digital goods.
Yeah, I mean, think about it. If Amazon, of all companies, thinks it's worth it to have that horrible of a user experience to avoid paying the fees to Apple, how much more important is it for a small startup with no money?
Yeah, and we were at a point where, you know, our goal was we were only making a couple cents, like every kind of purchase kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just wasn't...
It wasn't feasible.
It wasn't feasible at all for us. Like we couldn't afford to lose 30% of our like minimal margins, you know?
Yeah. So you don't have to go through the App Store for PWAs, which is a huge win in my opinion.
Yeah, which makes you can break Apple rules. You can break, I mean, Google Play Store doesn't really have that many.
It's
not nearly as bad. Oh, is it getting worse?
It's not as bad as Apple, but it's slowly changing to be more Apple.
That's too bad because Apple has its interesting kinks. I just remember one when we were in the education space with like streaming platforms. We weren't allowed to mention Android, even though like we just taught Android development. We weren't allowed to have it on that platform in an iOS app, which is crazy.
Yeah,
like, dude, everyone knows Android's your competitor.
Well, and there are all kinds of setbacks that can come with those App Store approvals.
Yeah.
I had a client once, I was pushing an update around Christmas and it was already a long wait. There was hardly anybody working doing the actual approvals. It was a major pain in the butt. And the problem is I kept getting rejected. And the reason that the app kept getting rejected was not I did something wrong. It was your app doesn't function. The test login information you gave me is incorrect. And so finally I looked at, because I couldn't figure out why is it not letting you log in? What the crap? And I finally looked at the screenshot a little closer and I realized they were missing 4 characters out of the password. Like the password I gave them was 12 characters.
Yeah.
There were 8 in the password slot. And I went and checked and I was like, no, it shows a dot for everyone. They were putting in the password wrong. And so I dinked around with the App Store for a week and a half trying to get an update out because whatever minimum wage tester they had testing the app couldn't figure out how to copy and paste a password.
Yeah. And that's what you deal with. And I feel like, you're always dealing with different personalities that will
Mhm.
let some things through and then other people won't. So it's like hit or miss every time
Yeah.
that you're submitting your app. Big plus, right? No app store. And you can literally deploy your app in minutes.
Mhm.
Like right when you have an update, you build it, you know?
Yeah.
And so then the other one, I think this is a big one too, especially for startups, is the cross-platform capability. You just have one code base,
Mhm.
and now you have a web-based app that works on iOS, Android, and web, and tablets, whatever you're doing, you know. So I think that's huge.
Yeah. And those two reasons were the main ones that we used a PWA for PerfectForm to begin with. Those are the two major selling points. Another big one is that you can install a PWA, and I mean install in quotes. It's not really an app installation the way that you think of it when you go and download something from the App Store, but you can add it to your home screen and it looks like an app. You can edit the shortcut.
It's like a bookmark to your browser,
Yes.
but it gets your logo and app icon. So
Yeah, and if you set the PWA up correctly after they install your app and they open it from that link, there's no like search bar, there's no navigation, anything that gets in the way.
It looks like a native app.
It just opens up and looks like a native app. And so for all intents and purposes, it is installable and nobody's ever really going to know the difference other than I didn't get this from the App Store, and you don't even have to wait for updates. It'll update the next time you open it.
That was a big hurdle for us, though. People did not grasp that concept with PerfectForm. Like I had to do tutorials and blog posts and everything.
Yeah, and that's something that you have to be aware of. That we were naive to it until we experienced it
because it made sense to us.
Yes, but there's a large gap between what people are used to and what they're willing to do and learn.
Mm-hmm.
And it's true of really any technology. You know, our capabilities for technological advancements and everything are much higher than where we're at now. The difference is you have to get the public used to something. And as of right now, PWAs are this foreign thing. They don't get it, how it works. The typical user is just like, wait, what?
Well, yeah, I had to get everything through the App Store.
Yeah. And so they don't understand that they don't have to do that. So if you want to go the PWA route, which can be an absolutely valid way to go, that's what we did. You have to be prepared to help coach your users in how to get your app, how to install it, and how to help them overcome that hurdle, because the idea is really good. That doesn't mean it's going to take off.
Mm-hmm. And I don't know how many times that like we pointed people how to install our app.
Oh, yeah.
And I could run into these people like weeks later, right? And they're showing me our app through the browser.
Yeah.
Like, no, it looks so much better when you save it.
Just this button right here.
Yeah, and
add to home screen.
All the browser features disappear and it's just our app. It's amazing. So that was a big hurdle. And yeah, people don't get it. But then one of the last final like amazing pros is just cost effectiveness. Like you need less developers, less to maintain, and you don't have to have multiple native apps to.
Yeah. Well, and as far as like skill level goes and rarity of developers that can do a PWA, developers who specialize in doing a PWA are rarer than just a normal web developer, but it's something that any web developer can figure out in like a day.
Yeah.
Because it's just add this stuff to your manifest, use web workers, and use caching. And that's essentially it. And a skilled web developer can look at that and go, oh, wait a minute, that's easy. Mm-hmm. And they can do that. Whereas if you're looking for, hey, I want a cross-platform native app and I want it done in Flutter, your pool of developers is much lower, which means your cost is probably going to be a little bit higher. And so the cost of an average web developer versus a Flutter developer or a Swift developer or whatever is generally going to be a little bit lower.
Getting into the cons, I feel like the cons really can outweigh the positives pretty quickly depending on your use cases.
Yeah, I'm going to be honest. I love the PWA technology. I think it's really great. And I think in the future, it's going to be something fantastic. As of right now, these cons that we're going to get into, if we were to, because we just recently shut down PerfectForm, and we didn't find the market that we needed for it, and we decided to go different directions with other projects and focus on those. And so we shut down PerfectForm, and if we were to ramp it back up today, I probably wouldn't do it as a PWA.
Mm.
Not because PWAs are bad, but because the cons that exist are such big cons that, and it's not the fault of the PWA technology. I personally blame Apple.
It is. It's all Apple's fault for sure. It is 1,000%. It's Apple's fault.
I can't tell you how many problems I had with Safari.
Mm-hmm.
And like we've mentioned, the whole user education, getting over the hurdles, they're opening it on their browser instead of using the app. Like it's hard.
A level of trust diminishes.
Yes.
With your user base when
and that's another thing. And they're uncomfortable with it. And because they're uncomfortable with it, they're hesitant to spend money on it and that kind of thing. So I probably wouldn't make it as a PWA because of the following cons. But that doesn't mean PWAs are bad or that they're not a fit for anything. Mm-hmm. It's just for our use case and what we were doing, it was exciting, it was cool, but we'd probably go a different direction just because of the hurdles.
For sure.
So the first one that I want to talk about is limited access to device features. And again, this is a major con for PerfectForm because you can't access all native device functionalities. And by all, I mean, on an Android, you're pretty much good. On a Windows computer, you're pretty much good. Anything Apple related, there's a long list of things you cannot do. And this is an especially large problem there because everything on your iPhone and your iPad goes through Safari. And the limitation here is Safari. So even if you download like Brave browser or Firefox or insert browser on the App Store here, on iOS, it goes through Safari. Yeah. So they are limited to whatever Safari can do.
There's no getting around it. And I don't think any other browsers are allowed to add shortcuts.
Nope.
Except for Safari. So they make you natively
So they make
Safari.
you use Safari.
Yeah.
And I hate it.
Uh-huh.
So there's a lot of stuff that you can't access as far as native functionalities, such as Bluetooth is iffy. Those kinds of features.
So the killers for us were push notifications.
That was a big one.
And Bluetooth, because we did want to move into wearables with our app. And that was a huge...
Which through Safari, at least when we were making PerfectForm, was not available.
Yeah.
And it was a hard no. And the push notifications were a major pain point.
Yeah.
Because on Android, you could do push notifications and it was fine.
Yeah.
iOS, we absolutely could not. And so we had to turn to, hey, we're going to send out an email.
Or SMS messaging.
And
then that raises our costs because we have to pay for every text sent.
Mm-hmm.
And so it just adds all these extra layers of complexity, in my opinion.
Yeah, well, and nobody wants to sign up for, hey, text me.
Yeah, no one wants to give you their number. No one. I don't want to give my number. I've been getting so much spam lately. It's so annoying. Yeah. I blame politics and the elections.
Oh, 100%. Nobody wants to get a text about it. Emails just get lost. Mm-hmm. Everybody has a sea of emails. And they're not watching for, hey, did I get a notification from this one app?
Right.
And so they miss notifications, they miss messages.
Not to mention now that makes them have to use a second app to use your app.
Yes. And it's a major pain point not having any kind of notification system available.
So that kind of goes into the next, they're not truly native. So you're not going to have a feel like a native app all the time. It's a lot harder to make it feel like a native app.
Another one is discoverability. Because on the App Store, it's kind of a catch-22. On the App Store, you're going to be buried by everything else that's in the App Store and whatever Apple or Google decides to push as featured apps and all that stuff. It's a real problem for every app, no matter which way you slice it. But you don't even have the advantage of people being able to search for you in the App Store because you're not on there,
Right.
which is a good and a bad thing. It's good because, like we talked about, there's no middleman. You don't have to deal with the App Store updates, the whole system for validation. You don't have to pay Apple anything or Google anything for transaction fees because you're on the App Store. But you have to be on top of all of your own marketing all of the time, because other than going to your website and finding your web app, nobody's going to find it.
And that's another thing. You can talk about having an app and people might remember the name and then they can't find it because they only search in the App Store.
Yeah.
Which
And
is crazy. So many people don't look for websites. Like, I always look for people's websites, but that is not the normal way people search.
No,
for
people
things.
go to the App Store and they search for the app name, and when they can't find it, they're like, screw it.
They're like, oh, dang it. I guess it's not ready yet.
Yep.
Or that guy's a liar.
Or both. It's a real problem. Discoverability goes down and it makes it harder to be found and take off.
Yeah. But I mean, honestly, at the end of the day, being known and discovered is on you anyways.
Yeah.
Like,
it's just an extra hurdle
For sure.
for that.
Yeah, because you have to market your product. Everyone thinks they're going to be the next unicorn and just like everyone's going to magically discover them. Hate to break it, guys. It's a lot of work to get popular.
You are not going to be the next unicorn.
But I hope you are.
Because
but
I am.
Don't plan on it. Why? Did I send you that meme? Oh my gosh, it's hilarious. I might put it on the screen. It's a little inappropriate. There's this kid. It's this cartoon, right? And this guy is sitting on his horse's head, and someone comes up and goes, "Why are you riding your horse? Why are you riding your horse that way?"
You did actually.
And the horse runs away. He goes, "It's not a horse. It's a unicorn." Oh my gosh.
Oh, geez.
I might have to cut that story out, but it's hilarious.
Why?
I don't know.
If you know, you know.
If you know, you know. It's a unicorn.
But anyways, yes, absolutely. I hope for you that you're the next unicorn app and it takes off and you go viral, but you can't bank on that.
Right. Don't bank on that. You have to bank on your own grit.
Your own grid, huh?
Grid.
If I just draw more squares, my app will take off.
And then you also you're tightly coupled to browser dependencies. You're dependent on the browser of whatever device.
And that's the challenge for iOS in specific, is you are bound to Safari. And for whatever reason, I'm sure it's not malicious at all and trying to drive people away from making PWAs in the app ecosystem so that they have to pay Apple 30%.
They don't want your 30%
because
they're giving us a deal with that number.
They would never do such a thing, the same way they'd never talk to the WordPress Foundation about and Shopify's CEO about trying to force mom and pop shops into paying 30% for
wild.
Yeah. But anyways, that would never happen.
So the cons pile up pretty quick.
Yeah, and most of it's Apple's fault.
Right? And it is Apple's fault. So if you only want to make like Windows and Android apps,
great, go for it.
Dude, you're unstoppable.
It's the way to go.
Yeah, for sure.
But iOS is a real deal killer for that.
It is. It makes everything.
Because it's got so many challenges and it makes everything awkward.
But with that being said, even for us, decide if we went native with PerfectForm, we'd still have to have a clunky purchase process.
Yeah.
We'd have to force people through the web browser to purchase, and then they can
I think what we would probably do, as this isn't on script for PWAs, but what we would probably do is use native script, because then I could export things into a PWA and still have native apps. And so if they wanted to use the PWA, they could do that to go purchase, and we just disable that feature in native apps.
Yeah.
But
you still have the clunkiness of you can't buy from the App Store app, which
but Amazon
confuses
does
people
it.
Well, but what's wild is you're not allowed to state what you're doing either.
Mm-hmm.
Like, so they have weird rules around that. So like, if you ever notice, like Amazon, you can't buy digital products, but they don't tell you why you can't buy digital products.
Yep.
You have to just figure it out.
Yeah. And it's a major pain.
Yeah.
But that's a huge thing for PWAs, and it makes it clunky and awkward for anything.
But don't get me wrong. I think PWAs are really cool. And there is a lot of use cases for them.
Yeah. It's just we were making a marketplace.
We found some difficult hurdles.
For what we were doing, it wasn't a fantastic fit.
Yeah.
But the technology is amazing. And if you're building even just a freemium product, then absolutely.
For sure.
Because if you don't need the notifications, if you don't need the Bluetooth, if you don't need to get around, if you don't need all that stuff, then perfect. That's great. And PWAs are great. They function great. It's a great technology. So we've already talked about some of these, but some of the unique challenges behind PWAs are service workers, which for those of you who don't know, they're essential for offline functionality. They're essentially threads just for web, because browsers, so threads are different processes on your processor. And there's the UI thread, also known as the main thread, that you stay off of for anything that you can, because it'll lock up your UI and make it unresponsive. If you've ever been using an app and you press like a purchase button and everything freezes and like your loading spinner gets choppy, that's because they're doing work on the main thread. Browsers only exist on the main thread. There are no threads, no true threads in JavaScript or TypeScript or whatever you want to use. TypeScript compiles down into JavaScript, but whatever, semantics. There are no true threads there, and service workers essentially mock threads through the browser. And so they're essential for that offline functionality, but they're super tricky to manage and update. You run into a lot of the old school problems that existed with threads in Java, for example, when they were kind of a newer thing. And some of these problems still exist today, but a lot of them have been solved with maturity of the technology. Web doesn't have that advantage so much. And so it can be really hard to manage those and find people that know how to use them properly. So that's one challenge.
And then I feel like we touched on cross browser compatibility.
Yeah, we've kind of talked that one to death.
Everything changes between Android and
yeah.
Apple, and Safari sucks. And then also push notifications. It's a bummer. It works in the Android world, Windows world, but not Apple world.
Yeah. Another big limitation that we were gonna run into. We hadn't gotten there yet, but it was in my line of sight.
Well, yeah, so we wanted to basically have offline support for video content.
Yes. And the problem is PWAs also come with storage limitations, where you can have an app. If you download, for example, the Udemy app, and I want to go download a whole course so that I have it offline.
You can fill up your phone.
You can fill up your whole phone with that.
Yep.
But I'm trying to remember what that arbitrary limit was, but the actual number. But with progressive web apps, there's a hard limit as to how much space you can take up. So between your actual app and any associated data, you have X amount of, I'm wanting to say it was megabytes. Like you didn't even get a gigabyte.
Well, it's probably whatever the browser allows, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm wanting to say it was 500-ish, but I don't remember for sure. Somewhere in there, you have a storage limitation and you cannot exceed that. Mm-hmm. And so limited storage compared to native apps is a real challenge, especially if it's a data intensive application, like where we were wanting to download videos. That was gonna be a problem. Mm-hmm. I hadn't figured out what we were doing about that yet, but I knew it was gonna be a problem.
Yeah. Yeah, it was gonna be a major problem. I mean, we had a lot of major future problems, but we already were starting to shift away and we were gonna go native anyways.
Yeah, that was a problem for another sprint.
Yeah. Oh, man.
You know, there are lots of pros and cons and challenges involved with PWAs. What do you think good fits for a progressive web app are?
I think there's so many good fits out there. Any like content driven platforms. Like news sites, blogs where like you might want offline access, like the ability to like save articles and go and read them when you're on an airplane or you don't have service. Like anything where news related things, you can save text-based things at a way smaller level easier than like video-based things.
Yeah, that's true.
So like, I guess, do you have any other feed?
I mean, e-commerce platforms they can be a good fit depending on what you're selling, how you're selling it, and what your needs are for that e-commerce platform.
Yeah.
If you're doing something like Etsy, where I'm selling physical goods, then I don't believe Apple takes that percentage. I think it's only digital.
They do. Yeah, it's only digital.
And so, that is something that you could do natively. But if you've got digital goods, that's a good fit. If you have something that's not massively content related, like, we need video and stuff, or you're selling videos, selling courses, e-commerce platforms would be a good fit for PWAs. Rapid prototyping is something that they're great for.
I think rapid prototyping is the coolest, just because you can push updates to your team and they don't have to go through test flight or any like weird
because with test flight and even with Firebase updates and all that stuff, it can be a real pain to manage users and get real feedback, and you can go implement a whole bunch of libraries that work really well for web-based feedback and analytics and all that stuff, and get a good handle on what do we want to truly build before we start investing in a bigger thing.
Yeah.
Other good fits might be small personal hobby projects. Hey, I've got a music player or something like that. Games could be a good fit for PWAs. There's actually in Godot, some people argue about the pronunciation. Some call it Godot, some call it Godot. I call it Godot.
Some call it Godot.
Right. They're dumb. But anyways, there's actually an option. There's a box you can tick to turn your game into a PWA. And so if you want to sidestep the App Store, if you want to sidestep that, you want to avoid the App Store fees, then sure, as long as the cons of it don't apply to you as much, then absolutely use a PWA.
Absolutely. Times that you probably want to consider going native or a hybrid solution, but like go through app stores, would be any kind of like deep integration into your device hardware. So if you really want to leverage AR or the camera or any phone sensor, you're probably going to want a native app or a hybrid version, because you can still use like
native script,
React Native, Flutter.
Well, Flutter is technically native. It's just cross-platform.
I was looking for cross-platform.
Yes.
So like you can still do cross-platform solutions and still be able to leverage hardware of devices a little more, especially with native script.
Yeah.
I guess, and then like if your app's graphics or performance is intensive, for a while we were considering going like Unreal Engine.
Yeah, we were looking at using a game engine for PerfectForm.
Yeah.
But that's also because we wanted to integrate a whole bunch of cool 3D things and, device capabilities, integrate AR. And we had like this whole gamified path progression going on.
At those points, you'd want to be natively on the device.
Yeah. PWAs can have really good performance because of things like service workers, but you're still in a browser, and you need to consider that because you're not going to get anywhere near the full performance of a native application. And so if your application is graphics intensive or resource hungry in any way, then I would probably not do a PWA.
And then one that a lot of people don't think about, especially when you're in the tech space, you don't think, oh, this isn't going to be a problem. There's actually, depending on your target audience, right? There are certain versions, at least in iOS, that won't even support PWAs.
Yep.
And like my mom has an iPad that she plays Words with Friends on, but it's so old she can't open.
I would get so mad when we were testing versions of the app and you were sitting there just this isn't working on this version of the iPad. And I'd open it up and I'd look at the reference for, can I use it? And I'm just like, well, that's because it doesn't effing support this feature. So no, it doesn't work.
Well, and in that case, it wasn't even that old of a version. So you have to be really careful with what you can, what's even supported out there.
Yeah.
Because you get a couple iOS updates off and your shit might not work.
In summary, progressive web apps represent a significant step forward in the web's evolution. I think they're a great step. It's a great technology overall. It has its challenges, and depending on what you're trying to use it for, it can or could not be a great fit. But it offers this middle ground between web and native apps where you're not bound to all of the rules that you have with here's a native application on the App Store, but you're a step ahead of just go visit my web app in a browser.
Yes. And yeah, I think as long as you know your specific needs, you'll know very quickly whether or not a PWA is a good route for you. With that being said, I still think they're really cool. Even though I feel like we just bashed the shit out of them, but I still really like PWAs.
I think I wouldn't look at it as we bashed them.
Yeah.
This is all the things that we wish we had realized or realized the gravity of before we started making it as here's our product and we're going to use a PWA for it. We learned a lot of really important lessons, and that doesn't make the technology bad.
That's true.
We were just trying to do things that they're not capable of yet.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's mostly because I didn't look into, hey, is Safari gonna be
I also
problem?
think the PerfectForm was a good learning experience for us. It made us we're way more adamant on planning and making sure you're choosing the right technologies before we build our products.
There's a concept that I learned the phrasing for this from an ex-Apple employee, and it's fail fast. And that's something that we didn't do with PerfectForm that we should have. And that is, hey, we're going to want this list of features before we focus on let's build out a beautiful UI, let's build out this beautiful experience. Let's make a test page for each of these features and see what works and what doesn't. And if our checklist of mandatory things is all checked off, cool, we move forward with this technology and we figure out the rest from there. If there's a whole bunch on here that's missing, like notifications, for example, and Bluetooth capability, if we can't access those, then we learned really quickly that this path isn't going to work out.
Yeah.
So I think it all comes down to what you want to use it for, what your application is, and what you need to make that happen.
Yeah. And don't be too stubborn to not pivot. Pivoting is important, and changing direction sometimes just has to happen.
It's true.
And now we're going to talk about PWAs.